The president's agenda and the future of birthright citizenship are on the line tomorrow in high-stakes arguments before the U.S. Supreme Court. We will bring those to you live. At issue here is not birthright citizenship itself, but instead the question of the power of the lower courts and whether they have the judicial authority to issue a nationwide ban on Trump's move to end the constitutionally guaranteed right, a question that could have widespread implications. And joining us now is Cecilia Wong. She's the National Legal Director of the American Civil Liberties Union. And the ACLU was the first to file a lawsuit against the Trump administration move to end birthright citizenship. However, they're not part of this specific case that's appearing before the Supreme Court. Cecilia, thank you for being with us. Again, just want to emphasize that the Supreme Court's not actually hearing arguments on the merits here about whether President Trump can end birthright citizenship through this executive order. Instead, the issue before the court has to do with the power of the lower court and the judge to issue nationwide injunctions. Can you explain further?
Sure. This is an issue that's been brewing in a number of cases that have been brought against the U.S. government across various administrations. But what's interesting about this particular case, as it's teed up for argument in the Supreme Court tomorrow, is that the Trump administration is complaining, essentially, that 3 different federal appeals courts have permitted lower court injunctions to go into effect, basically blocking the president's unconstitutional and illegal birthright citizenship order. And Trump is saying in the Supreme Court, I'm complaining here that the federal judiciary is enjoining me left and right, and the lower courts of the United States are blocking my policies from going into effect. And he calls out in his brief that there are more court injunctions against his administration than other administrations. Well, he skips over the obvious fact that the reason for that is that the Trump administration is implementing so many unconstitutional and blatantly illegal policies. And so this is an interesting case because the Supreme Court, for a few years now, has been interested in the idea of so-called universal injunctions. And it's teed up in a situation where it's an immigration issue. It's, in fact, a nationality issue where the Constitution says not only that everyone born in the United States is by birth a United States citizen, but also that there should be uniformity in issues of nationality and immigration. So I think that the court is going to be looking at a particular context for issues of so-called universal injunctions, where the headwinds are really against the U.S. government here, against the executive branch.
Has the Supreme Court ever weighed in on the power of lower courts? Again, we're talking about federal courts, federal judges. And could they change the range of those judges' power?
I think what's critical for people to understand is that these issues that the executive branch is raising, that the Trump administration is raising here, really should be looked at on a case-by-case basis. So the Trump administration is trying to, again, attack the federal judiciary and the notion of checks and balances against the unconstitutional use of executive power here to try to override the Constitution and, in fact, the Reconstruction Constitution through executive fiat, through executive order. But if you look at this on a case-by-case basis, as the courts must, as I said, I think that we now have orders that 22 states have won, blocking the president's executive order, blatantly unconstitutional, from going into effect. And I think the question the Supreme Court is looking at here is a really important one. Do you want to have a situation where in 22 states you have one rule that comports with the U.S. Constitution, or do you want to have, and in the other states, the president's order can go into effect? As the states proved, and as the organizations and individuals who have challenged the birthright citizenship order have proved in court, those injuries are nationwide. There are so many people who have been harmed by the president's executive order on birthright citizenship. We have to have a uniform rule. And I do think that the Supreme Court, this is not the case in which the Supreme Court should announce any new rules about so-called universal injunctions. If the president of the United States is implementing a policy that is blatantly unconstitutional, the federal courts do have the power, if they've got the right plaintiff in front of them, to block that president's action nationwide. And they do have that power here. They had the right plaintiffs coming in 22 states, numerous organizations with members in every single state, and individuals, expectant parents, who are deeply harmed by this order. So I think this is not the case for the Supreme Court to disturb the existing case law with that holds the executive branch to account when they do something that's blatantly unconstitutional.
Okay, we'll be able to hear those arguments for ourselves and see what each side says tomorrow and how the Supreme Court proceeds with this issue and its potential implications and the trickle down following it. Thank you so much, Cecilia Wong, for laying the groundwork for us.